The massive space station Harmony Prime stretched across the void like a metallic flower, blooming in the darkness. Its countless docking bays buzzed with activity, as ships from hundreds of different worlds arrived for the most important gathering in galactic history. The first-ever Apex Predator exhibition was about to begin. Commander Zelix of the Galactic Council stood at the main observation deck, watching the parade of vessels through the transparent aluminum windows. Each ship was unique, reflecting the biology and culture of its home world. The Vaxen brought their sleek biomechanical cruisers that seemed to breathe as they moved. The crystal ships of the Zephyrians caught the station's lights and scattered them into rainbow patterns. The dark angular vessels of the Karathi seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The idea for the exhibition had come from the Treaty of Mutual Understanding, signed just 2 cycles ago. Every species in the galaxy wanted to know what made the others tick. What better way to understand a civilization than to see what they feared most? What had shaped their evolution, their culture, their very survival? The rules were simple. Each species would bring their planet's apex predator, the creature that sat at the top of their food chain, the beast that had forced their ancestors to become clever, strong, or fast. The creature that still haunted their children's nightmares and shaped their adult fears. No weapons, no artificial enhancements, just the raw, natural terror that their world had produced. Zelix checked the arrival manifest on his datapad. The responses had been overwhelming. The great civilizations were all here. The Thornbacks from Kepler 442b had sent their massive biotransport, probably containing one of their legendary leviathans. The psychic species from the Andromeda sector had arrived in ships that made his head hurt, just to look at them. Even the mysterious Silicon Collective had sent a representative. The exhibition hall itself was a marvel of engineering. Each species had been given a specialized containment area designed to hold their most dangerous predators safely, while allowing others to observe. Force fields, environmental controls, and emergency systems had all been tested and retested. The insurance alone had cost the Council 3 years of budget. Dr. Myrex, the station's chief xenobiologist, approached Zelix with obvious excitement. Her 4 eyes were bright with anticipation, and her tentacles writhed in the way they did when she was particularly thrilled about her work. She had been preparing for this day for months. "The preliminary data is fascinating," she said, her translator crackling slightly as it processed her rapid speech. "The variety of evolutionary solutions is remarkable. The Karathi brought something that exists primarily in another dimension. The Zephyrians have a predator that can phase through solid matter. The diversity is beyond what we hoped for." Zelix nodded, though something nagged at him. "What about the humans? Have they arrived yet?" Earth was one of the newer members of the galactic community. Their representative, Dr. Sarah Chen, had been enthusiastic about participating, but mysterious about what they planned to bring. Dr. Myrex consulted her own datapad. Yes, they docked about an hour ago. Dr. Chen requested a standard atmospheric containment unit. Nothing special about the specifications. Actually, they were quite modest, much smaller than most other requests. This puzzled Zelix. Humans were known for their strange sense of humor and their tendency to approach problems from unexpected angles. But surely they understood the seriousness of this exhibition. This was about sharing the deepest fears and evolutionary pressures that had shaped their species. It was about mutual understanding and respect among the stars. The main exhibition was scheduled to begin in just a few hours. Representatives from each species would present their apex predator to the gathered crowd, explaining its hunting methods, its evolutionary advantages, and its role in shaping their civilization. The presentations would be broadcast across the galaxy, bringing together billions of beings in a shared moment of understanding. Already, crowds were gathering in the observation areas. The excitement was palpable, thrumming through the station's corridors like an electrical current. Beings who had never seen each other before stood side by side, united by curiosity and a healthy respect for the unknown dangers they were about to witness. The Vaxen delegation had set up their containment area with mechanical precision. Their biomechanical hunter was hidden behind layers of energy shields and physical barriers. Even so, the subtle vibrations coming from their section made other beings nervous. The creature could allegedly adapt to any environment within seconds, becoming the perfect predator for whatever conditions it found itself in. The Zephyrians had constructed what looked like a crystal palace around their containment area. Their mantis-like predator was supposed to be able to phase through solid matter, striking from directions that should be impossible. The rainbow lights dancing around their section were either beautiful or ominous, depending on your perspective. The Karathi section was simply dark. Their shadow beast fed on fear itself, growing stronger as its prey became more terrified. The darkness around their area seemed deeper than it should be, and several other species had requested to be moved further away from it. Then there was the human section. Dr. Chen had arrived with a single, unremarkable containment unit that looked like it could hold a medium-sized pet. She had been polite but secretive about its contents, claiming only that they had brought the most destructive force their planet had ever produced. When pressed for details, she had smiled mysteriously and said that everyone would understand during the presentation. Some of the other species' representatives had been openly dismissive. Humans were still considered something of a novelty in galactic society. They were young, small, and came from a relatively peaceful world. What kind of apex predator could such a tame species possibly produce? Their containment requirements suggested something barely larger than a household pet. Dr. Chen seemed unbothered by the skepticism. She had spent the last few hours checking and rechecking her equipment, making sure the environmental controls were set perfectly. Whatever was in that containment unit, she was taking its care very seriously. She had even requested access to the station's medical bay, though she wouldn't explain why. As the final hour approached, the exhibition hall filled with representatives from across the galaxy. The air hummed with translation devices working overtime to convert hundreds of different languages and communication methods. The anticipation was almost overwhelming. Commander Zelix took his place at the central podium, looking out over the assembled delegates. This was history in the making. For the first time, the galaxy would truly understand each other's deepest fears and evolutionary pressures. The bonds formed here today would strengthen the galactic community for generations to come. "Welcome, beings of the galaxy," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the vast hall. "Today we gather not as separate species but as children of the same universe, shaped by the same forces of evolution and survival. Today we share our fears, our challenges, and our triumphs. Today we truly begin to understand each other." The crowd fell silent, thousands of beings from hundreds of worlds focusing their attention on the podium. In a few moments, the first presentation would begin. The galaxy was about to learn what nightmares looked like across the stars. Dr. Chen stood quietly beside her unremarkable containment unit, a small smile on her face. Soon everyone would understand why humans had survived and thrived, despite coming from such a seemingly peaceful world. Soon they would meet Earth's true apex predator. The first presentation began with a sound that made every being in the exhibition hall freeze. It was not quite a roar, not quite a scream, but something between the two that seemed to reach into the deepest parts of their minds and activate every survival instinct they possessed. The Thornback Leviathan from Kepler 442b was about to be revealed. Ambassador Crix of the Thornback people stood before the massive containment field that held their contribution. He was proud, as his people always were when discussing their homeworld's most dangerous inhabitant. The energy barrier shimmered and became transparent, revealing the creature within. The Leviathan was beautiful in the way that disasters are beautiful. Its chitinous shell gleamed like polished obsidian, and its 6 legs moved with impossible grace for something so large. Each leg was tipped with claws that could cut through starship hull material. Its head was mostly mouth, filled with rows of teeth that rotated like grinding wheels. "This is why my people became space travelers," Ambassador Crix explained to the hushed crowd. "The Leviathans ruled our world for millions of years. They could consume entire forests in a single day, leaving nothing but bare rock behind. Our ancestors had 2 choices: learn to fly or become food." The demonstration continued as a mechanical prey animal was released into the containment area. The Leviathan moved with shocking speed for its size. In seconds, the metal construct was reduced to scattered pieces. The creature then began to actually consume the metal, its teeth grinding the steel into powder that it swallowed eagerly. The crowd murmured in appreciation and fear. Several species took notes, either for scientific study or for nightmares to avoid. The Thornbacks had certainly made their point about the evolutionary pressure that had driven them to develop their advanced technology and space travel. Next came the Zephyrians. Their representative, a being made of what looked like living crystal, gestured gracefully toward their containment area. The crystal barriers became clear, revealing what appeared to be empty space. Then the lights dimmed and suddenly the predator became visible. The phase mantis existed partially in normal space and partially in another dimension. It looked like a traditional mantis insect, but one made of pure rainbow light that shifted and flowed like liquid. When it moved, it seemed to step through solid matter as if it were not there. Our predator taught us that reality is flexible, the Zephyrian explained, their voice ringing like wind chimes. To escape the phase mantis, we learned to bend light, to exist in multiple dimensions at once. We learned that what seems solid and real may not be, and what seems impossible may be the only truth that matters. The demonstration was eerie. Target objects were placed in the containment area, and the phase mantis simply walked through the barriers as if they did not exist. It struck the targets from impossible angles, its claws passing through solid matter until the moment of contact, when they became devastatingly real. The Karathi presentation was different. Their representative, a being that seemed to absorb light around it, spoke in a voice that sounded like whispers in an empty house. "We do not display our predator," it said. "Our predator displays itself through us." The lights in the hall dimmed and suddenly everyone could feel it. A presence that was hungry, ancient, and deeply wrong. The shadow beast did not have a physical form in the traditional sense. It existed in the space between thoughts, in the moment between sleeping and waking, in the fear that lived in every mind's darkest corners. Several beings in the audience began to show signs of distress. The more afraid they became, the stronger the presence grew. It fed on fear itself, growing larger and more powerful with each terrified thought. The Karathi had learned to master their fears not by conquering them, but by understanding that some fears were tools, and some were food for things that should not be fed. The demonstration ended when the Karathi representative sang a low, haunting song that seemed to drive the presence back into whatever dark dimension it called home. The relief in the hall was palpable, but several species made note to avoid any future diplomatic visits to the Karathi homeworld. Species after species presented their contributions. The Vaxen showed their biomechanical hunter, a creature that had been part machine, part living tissue, and entirely deadly. It could adapt to any environment in real time, growing new organs and abilities as needed. Their ancestors had learned to become similarly adaptable, leading to their mastery of biological and mechanical engineering. The Silicon Collective presented a swarm entity that existed as both individual and group mind. Thousands of tiny crystalline beings that could work together to form a single massive predator, or scatter into invisible individual hunters. Their presentation required complex mathematical equations to fully understand, which somehow made it even more terrifying. Each presentation followed the same pattern. A fearsome predator was revealed, its hunting methods demonstrated, and its role in shaping the presenting species was explained. The audience grew more impressed and more horrified with each new revelation. The diversity of death in the galaxy was truly remarkable. Finally, it was Earth's turn. Dr. Sarah Chen stepped forward with her small containment unit. The crowd had been making jokes about the humans all day. Some species had been taking bets on what Earth could possibly contribute to such an impressive display of galactic terror. Dr. Chen stood calmly before the gathered representatives. She was a small woman by human standards, and positively tiny compared to some of the other species present. Her containment unit looked like it belonged in a pet store rather than an exhibition of apex predators. "Honored beings of the galaxy," she began, her voice clear and confident despite the size of the audience. "Earth is pleased to contribute to this remarkable sharing of knowledge. Our entry represents millions of years of evolutionary pressure and the ultimate refinement of survival instincts." Some representatives chuckled. Others leaned forward with genuine curiosity. The humans had earned a reputation for surprising people, though usually not in ways involving mortal terror. Dr. Chen opened the containment unit with practiced ease. The crowd fell silent as she reached inside and carefully lifted out a small human child. The child appeared to be about 3 years old, with chubby cheeks, bright eyes, and was wearing a cheerful yellow shirt decorated with cartoon animals. The silence in the hall was deafening. Beings from across the galaxy stared in confusion, waiting for the real presentation to begin. Some assumed this was some sort of elaborate joke. Others wondered if there had been a translation error. The child, whose name was Emma, looked around at the strange faces and unusual beings surrounding her. Her lower lip began to tremble as she took in the vast hall, the alien faces, and the overwhelming strangeness of her situation. She had been sleeping in the containment unit, and waking up in this bizarre place was not part of her usual routine. Dr. Chen held Emma gently, speaking to her in soft, comforting tones. But the damage was already done. Emma was tired, confused, and surrounded by things that her 3-year-old mind could not possibly understand. She was in a strange place away from her familiar surroundings, and there were far too many eyes looking at her. The first whimper was barely audible, a soft, sad sound that touched something deep in the minds of every being present. Even species that had never seen a human child before recognized the universal sound of a young creature in distress. Then Emma began to cry. Not the dramatic wailing that would come later, but the heartbroken sob of a small child who wanted her mother and her familiar bed, and her favorite stuffed animal. It was a sound that bypassed logic and reason, and spoke directly to the protective instincts that existed in almost every intelligent species. But something else was happening. The other apex predators, safely contained in their specialized enclosures, were beginning to react. The thornback leviathan stopped its restless pacing and moved to the far corner of its container. The phase mantis flickered rapidly between dimensions, as if trying to escape to somewhere else entirely. The shadow beast, that ancient predator of fear itself, seemed to retreat deeper into whatever dark dimension it called home. For something that fed on terror, the sound of a distressed human child was apparently the opposite of nourishing. Dr. Chen watched the crowd with a knowing expression as Emma continued to cry. The sound was growing louder now, more insistent. The child was working herself up to what humans knew was coming next. The real demonstration was about to begin. The transition from sad whimpering to full-scale tantrum happened in less than 3 seconds. One moment Emma was crying softly in Dr. Chen's arms. The next moment she was screaming with the force of a small hurricane. The sound was unlike anything the galactic representatives had ever heard. It was not just loud, though it was certainly that. It was not just high-pitched, though several species with sensitive hearing immediately covered their auditory organs. It was the pure, unfiltered expression of a 3-year-old human who was tired, confused, and very, very unhappy. Emma threw herself backward in Dr. Chen's arms with surprising strength, her small body becoming rigid with fury. When Dr. Chen tried to hold her more securely, Emma decided that was completely unacceptable and began what humans called a tantrum. But what the galaxy was about to learn was actually a precisely engineered psychological warfare technique. The child threw herself onto the floor of the exhibition platform with dramatic flair. She lay on her back, arms and legs flailing, producing sounds that seemed impossible for such a small creature. The screams came in waves, each one building on the last, creating a crescendo of chaos that filled the massive exhibition hall. "Where is my Binky?" Emma shrieked at the top of her lungs, though the words were mostly unintelligible through her tears and rage. "I want my mama. I want to go home." The translation devices struggled with the emotional intensity and volume, producing feedback that added to the general chaos. Dr. Chen stood calmly beside the writhing child, occasionally glancing at her data pad as if monitoring some kind of scientific instrument, which in a way she was. Emma was performing exactly as expected, demonstrating the awesome power of what humans had learned to call the terrible 2s and 3s. The effects on the audience were immediate and dramatic. Beings who had watched the previous Predator demonstrations with academic interest were now backing away from the human section. The sound seemed to penetrate every barrier, both physical and mental. It was relentless, unpredictable, and showed no sign of stopping. Commander Zelix, who had maintained his composure through presentations featuring shadow beasts and phase predators, found himself developing what humans would recognize as a stress headache. His forearms, normally so steady, began to tremble slightly. The sound was doing something to his nervous system that he could not explain or control. The other apex predators were reacting even more dramatically. The thornback leviathan, capable of devouring entire ecosystems, was pressed against the far wall of its containment unit, making distressed clicking sounds. Its massive claws, which could slice through starship armor, were covering what might have been its ears. The phase mantis was flickering between dimensions so rapidly that it became a blur of rainbow light. It seemed to be trying to find a dimension where the sound could not follow. But Emma's tantrum was apparently transcendent across multiple planes of existence. The shadow beast, that ancient predator of fear and nightmares, had apparently decided that Emma's emotional chaos was far too dangerous to approach. The Karathi representative looked genuinely puzzled as their apex predator retreated to whatever dark dimension it came from and refused to come back out. Emma, meanwhile, had moved into the next phase of her tantrum. She rolled over onto her stomach and began pounding the floor with her small fists. The exhibition platform, designed to withstand the impacts of massive alien predators, rang like a bell with each tiny blow. The acoustics of the hall amplified every impact. No, 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 no. She screamed, her face red with fury and tears streaming down her cheeks. The words seemed to be universal. Even beings who had never encountered humans before understood that this small creature was rejecting everything about her current situation with every fiber of her being. Dr. Chen reached into what appeared to be a standard scientific equipment bag and pulled out a small stuffed animal, a worn teddy bear that had clearly seen better days. She offered it to Emma, who looked at it for a moment with tear-filled eyes, then swatted it away with the kind of righteous indignation that only a 3-year-old could muster. "That is not my binky," Emma shrieked, as if Dr. Chen had offered her something personally offensive. The bear flew across the platform and landed near the feet of a Zephyrian representative, who jumped backward as if it were a live explosive. The tantrum was now reaching what humans would recognize as the peak phase. Emma had moved beyond simple crying and had entered the realm of pure, unbridled emotional chaos. She kicked her legs wildly, arched her back, and produced sounds that seemed to come from some primal part of the human experience. The station systems began to react to the acoustic assault. The translation devices, designed to handle hundreds of different languages and communication methods, started producing feedback loops as they tried to process the emotional intensity of Emma's screams. Warning lights began flashing as audio processors overloaded. Dr. Myrex, the station's chief xenobiologist, was frantically taking readings on her instruments. The biometric scanners were showing impossible results. How could something so small produce so much acoustic energy? How could such a tiny creature affect the emotional states of beings from completely different evolutionary backgrounds? Emma kicked harder, her small legs moving like pistons. One of her shoes flew off and struck a control panel near the vaccine containment area. The impact was tiny, but it hit exactly the right spot to cause a brief fluctuation in the energy barriers. For a moment, the biomechanical hunter inside was able to extend one of its sensory appendages outside its containment. The hunter, designed to analyze and adapt to any threat, extended its sensors toward Emma. Within seconds, it retracted the appendage and retreated to the center of its containment area. Its biomechanical systems were flashing warning colors that the vaccine recognized as indicating a critical system overload. "I want juice," Emma bellowed, though what she actually wanted was unclear to everyone present, possibly including Emma herself. She rolled over and began kicking at the air, her movements completely random but somehow managing to knock over a small equipment stand that Dr. Chen had brought. The equipment scattered across the platform, and one small device skittered across the floor toward the central control station for the entire exhibition hall. It was just a simple human toy, a small electronic device that played nursery rhymes, but when it collided with the control panel, it somehow managed to activate several systems at once. Emergency lights began flashing throughout the hall. The containment fields flickered ominously. Backup systems activated with loud mechanical sounds that added to the general chaos. The station's AI began making announcements in dozens of languages, trying to determine what kind of emergency was in progress. Emma, startled by the new lights and sounds, paused her tantrum for approximately half a second to look around. Then, apparently deciding that the light show was completely inadequate to meet her current emotional needs, she resumed screaming with even greater intensity. The pause had been just long enough for every being in the hall to experience a moment of blessed silence. The relief was so intense that several representatives actually sagged with exhaustion. Then the screaming resumed, and the psychological impact was somehow even worse than before. Dr. Chen checked her chronometer with scientific interest. Emma had been in full tantrum mode for exactly 7 minutes and 23 seconds. According to her research, They were approaching the moment when most adult humans would begin making serious compromises to make the screaming stop. But the galactic representatives had no experience with human child-rearing tactics. They had no idea that this was a normal part of human development, or that it could be managed with specific techniques. All they knew was that a small creature was producing sounds that bypassed their logical minds and activated every stress response they possessed. The first containment breach occurred at the 9-minute mark. The first containment breach was almost anticlimactic. A simple power fluctuation caused the energy barriers around the Silicon Collective swarm entity to drop for exactly 0.3 seconds. Under normal circumstances, this would have been automatically corrected by backup systems before anyone even noticed. But these were not normal circumstances. The swarm entity, which had been agitated by Emma's screaming for 9 solid minutes, immediately dispersed into thousands of tiny crystalline fragments and fled in every direction. They moved like liquid mercury, flowing around barriers and through ventilation systems in their desperate attempt to escape the acoustic assault. Emma, oblivious to the chaos she was causing, had moved into what child development specialists called the thrashing phase. She was now attempting to express her displeasure through full-body convulsions, while maintaining maximum volume on her vocal protests. Her small arms windmilled wildly as she rolled back and forth on the platform. "I want my mama," she shrieked, the words barely recognizable through her tears and rage. "Right now!" The demand was delivered with the kind of absolute authority that only a 3-year-old could muster, as if the universe itself should immediately comply with her wishes. The second containment breach occurred when one of Emma's wildly kicking legs connected with Dr. Chen's equipment bag. The bag flew across the platform and struck the manual override panel for the Karathi containment system. The shadow beast, which had been cowering in whatever dimension it called home, found its barriers suddenly and unexpectedly removed. But instead of emerging to terrorize the crowd as everyone feared, the ancient predator of nightmares took one psychic look at Emma mid-tantrum and decided that whatever dimension it was hiding in was definitely safer. The barriers sparked and reset automatically, but the shadow beast was already gone, fled to the deepest darkness it could find. Commander Zelix was trying to coordinate an emergency response, but his normally calm demeanor was cracking under the assault of Emma's continued screaming. He had dealt with space pirates, hostile aliens, and cosmic disasters, but nothing in his training had prepared him for the psychological warfare capabilities of an unhappy human toddler. The station's emergency AI was becoming increasingly confused. Its sensors detected a major disturbance in the exhibition hall, but all scans showed only one small human child producing the chaos. The AI began running diagnostic loops, trying to determine if its sensors were malfunctioning or if this truly was a single-child emergency. Emma had now discovered that she could make her screams echo by tilting her head at different angles. This was clearly the most interesting thing that had happened to her all day. So she began experimenting with various acoustic effects while maintaining her protest about the general unfairness of her situation. The Vaccine biomechanical hunter, designed to adapt to any threat, was having a complete system failure. Its adaptive algorithms could not process Emma as either prey or predator, and the illogical nature of her behavior was causing feedback loops in its biomechanical brain. The creature was essentially having the artificial intelligence equivalent of a nervous breakdown. Dr. Myrex was documenting everything with scientific fascination, even as her tentacles writhed with stress. The readings from Emma were unprecedented. The child was producing acoustic energy levels that should have been impossible for her lung capacity. Her emotional output was somehow affecting beings from completely different evolutionary backgrounds. The third containment breach happened when Emma sat up, suddenly, and threw her other shoe with surprising accuracy. The shoe struck the emergency override for the Zephyrian containment area, with enough force to activate the release mechanism. The crystal barriers dissolved, freeing the phase mantis. The phase mantis immediately began phasing rapidly between dimensions, its rainbow form flickering like a broken hologram. It was clearly trying to find a dimension where Emma's tantrum did not exist, but the child's emotional chaos seemed to transcend normal space-time boundaries. Security teams were attempting to respond to the multiple containment breaches, but they were facing an unprecedented problem. Their training covered hostile predators, not hostile predators that were fleeing in terror from a 3-year-old human. How do you recapture creatures that are actively trying to surrender? Emma rolled over and began what appeared to be an attempt at breakdancing, if breakdancing were performed by someone having an emotional crisis. Her movements were completely unpredictable, which made the station's targeting systems unable to lock onto her as either a threat or a person requiring assistance. "I hate everything," she announced to the universe at large, her voice carrying across the massive hall with crystal clarity. The translation systems finally gave up trying to process the emotional content and simply broadcast the pure sound, which somehow made it even more disturbing. The thornback leviathan, that legendary devourer of ecosystems, was now making soft whimpering sounds that its handler had never heard before. The massive creature was curled up in the corner of its containment area, trying to make itself as small as possible. Several tons of apex predator were being intimidated by a 40-pound human child. Ambassador Crix of the Thornbacks approached Dr. Chen with obvious desperation. "How do you make it stop?" he asked, his voice barely audible over Emma's continued protests. "My people have faced the Leviathans for millennia, but this is beyond our experience." Dr. Chen checked her chronometer again. 13 minutes and 47 seconds. They were approaching what human parents knew as the point of no return, the moment when rational negotiation became impossible and only specific interventions could restore peace. The fourth and final containment breach occurred when Emma suddenly stood up, wobbled for a moment, and then threw herself backward with the kind of dramatic flair usually reserved for professional theater. Her small body hit the platform with a sound that the acoustics of the hall turned into a thunderclap. The vibration traveled through the platform and into the support structures, causing a harmonic resonance that overloaded the final set of containment systems. The thornback leviathan found its barriers failing, just as Emma reached the peak of her tantrum performance. The massive creature, freed from its containment, immediately did something that no one in galactic history had ever recorded a thornback leviathan doing. It fled. The legendary apex predator capable of consuming entire forests took one look at Emma in full tantrum mode and decided that discretion was the better part of valor. The leviathan moved with shocking speed for something so large, its 6 legs carrying it toward the emergency exits with desperate efficiency. Its handler tried to intercept it, but the creature simply picked him up gently and carried him along as it fled, apparently unwilling to abandon its caretaker, but equally unwilling to stay in the same space as Emma. Emergency alarms were now blaring throughout the station. The AI had finally classified the situation as a Code 7 emergency, multiple apex predator containment failure with unknown catalyst. Evacuation protocols were being initiated for the first time in the station's history. Representatives from across the galaxy were streaming toward the exits, some carried by their own fleeing apex predators, others simply running on their own. The most feared creatures in known space were in full retreat from a single small human who wanted her binky and was not afraid to let everyone know about it. Emma, pleased with the attention she was finally receiving, decided to demonstrate her full vocal range. The sound that emerged was less like crying and more like the battle cry of some ancient warrior. If that warrior were 3 feet tall and wearing a shirt with cartoon animals on it. Dr. Chen stood calmly in the center of the chaos, monitoring her instruments and taking notes. The galactic scientific community was about to receive the most comprehensive data on psychological warfare ever collected. Emma was exceeding all projected parameters for emotional chaos generation. As the last of the fleeing delegates disappeared through the emergency exits, followed closely by their terrified apex predators, Dr. Chen finally decided it was time to implement the solution that every human parent knew by heart. She reached into her bag and pulled out a juice box. The transformation was immediate and absolute. One moment, Emma was in full battle cry mode, expressing her displeasure with the universe through maximum volume and dramatic physical gestures. The next moment, she spotted the juice box in Dr. Chen's hand and stopped mid-scream. The silence that followed was so sudden and complete that it seemed to have physical weight. Emergency alarms continued to blare throughout the station, but in the exhibition hall itself, the only sound was the gentle hum of ventilation systems and the distant clatter of fleeing apex predators. Emma sat up, tears still streaming down her red face, and pointed at the juice box with the kind of focused intensity usually reserved for military targeting systems. Juice, she said in a voice made hoarse by 15 minutes of top-volume protest. Her tone suggested that this was obviously what she had been asking for all along. Dr. Chen handed over the juice box with practiced ease, helping Emma figure out the straw with the patience of someone who had done this many times before. The child began drinking with the serious concentration of a desert traveler finding an oasis, apparently forgetting that moments ago she had been the most terrifying force in the galaxy. From her equipment bag, Dr. Chen also produced a small tablet device. She activated it, and the screen filled with bright, colorful animations of singing vegetables performing what appeared to be a musical number about the importance of washing hands. Emma immediately became transfixed, her earlier rage forgotten in the face of animated produce. Slowly, cautiously, some of the galactic representatives began to return to the exhibition hall. They moved like beings approaching an unexploded bomb, ready to flee again at the first sign of renewed hostilities. But Emma was now completely absorbed in her juice box and vegetables, occasionally giggling at particularly amusing moments in the show. Commander Zelix was among the first to return, though he maintained what he considered a safe distance from the human section. His forearms were still trembling slightly, and his normally composed expression showed the strain of experiencing psychological warfare for the first time. Dr. Chen looked up at the stunned faces surrounding her and decided it was time to explain. "Honored representatives," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the now quiet hall. "Allow me to introduce you to Earth's true apex predator, not because it hunts or kills, but because it cannot be reasoned with, predicted, or controlled by any known method." Emma looked up from her tablet long enough to smile at the crowd with juice-stained teeth, then returned to watching animated carrots teach proper nutrition. The contrast between this sweet, innocent image and the force of destruction she had been moments before was almost impossible to process. The human child operates on pure emotional chaos. Dr. Chen continued, consulting her data pad. It has unlimited energy reserves, can find the weak point in any system simply by existing within it, and fears nothing because it does not understand danger. It can break the will of any adult human in under 10 minutes, and as you have witnessed, its effects extend far beyond our own species. Dr. Myrex was frantically checking her instruments, trying to understand what had just happened. The readings from the past 15 minutes defied explanation. How could one small creature generate such psychological pressure? How had it affected apex predators from completely different evolutionary backgrounds? Ambassador Crix of the Thornbacks approached slowly, his expression a mixture of awe and terror. Your apex predator made our Leviathan flee," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The Leviathan has never fled from anything. It does not have a fear response. It does not understand the concept of retreat." Dr. Chen nodded understandingly. "Human children represent the ultimate evolutionary pressure. They have shaped our entire civilization. Every human innovation, from language to space travel, was developed partly to deal with the needs and demands of our offspring. We learned to be patient, creative, and adaptable because we had no choice." Emma finished her juice box and looked around for something to do with the empty container. Finding nothing immediately available, she decided to throw it at the nearest interesting target, which happened to be a very expensive piece of Zephyrian sensing equipment. The equipment sparked and went dark. "As you can see," Dr. Chen continued calmly, "they also cannot be completely controlled or predicted. Every human parent learns to live with a constant low level of chaos. We develop enhanced reflexes, improved problem-solving skills, and the ability to function under extreme stress." The Karathi representative, still shaken by their shadow beast's reaction, asked the question that was on everyone's mind. "But how do you survive? How does your species continue to exist if every child is this?" Dr. Chen smiled, the tired but affectionate smile that every parent in the galaxy would recognize. "We adapt," she said simply. "We learn that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe is not something that can be fought or reasoned with, but something that must be understood and managed. We learn patience, creativity, and the value of working together." Emma had apparently decided that the tablet was not sufficiently entertaining and was now attempting to explore the exhibition platform. She tottered toward the edge with the fearless curiosity that made human parents develop enhanced reflexes. Dr. Chen scooped her up with practiced ease. "More importantly," Dr. Chen continued, They grow out of it. Eventually, Emma will develop language skills, reasoning ability, and emotional regulation. She will become a productive member of society, but until then, she remains our most effective survival training. Commander Zelix was slowly regaining his composure, though he was still maintaining what he considered a safe distance from Emma. So this is why humans are so adaptable, so quick to find solutions to impossible problems. Exactly, Dr. Chen replied. When you've spent 3 years negotiating with someone who thinks that screaming is a valid form of communication, and that gravity is more of a suggestion than a law, dealing with hostile aliens or cosmic disasters seems relatively straightforward. Emma chose that moment to demonstrate her fearlessness by attempting to eat her own shoe. Dr. Chen redirected her with another toy, a simple action that the galactic representatives were beginning to understand required skills that their species had never needed to develop. The Vaxxan representative, whose biomechanical hunter was still experiencing system errors, approached hesitantly. Our predator is designed to adapt to any threat, it said, but it cannot process your offspring as either predator or prey. Its systems are confused. That is because human children exist outside normal predator-prey relationships, Dr. Chen explained. They are neither threat nor resource. They are pure potential energy that requires constant management and guidance. They cannot be defeated, only eventually educated. As the full implications of what they had witnessed began to sink in, the galactic representatives started to see humans in a completely new light. This young species, which had seemed so peaceful and reasonable, had survived and thrived on a world where every individual began life as a force of pure chaos. The Galactic Council would need weeks to process the implications. Humans had not just brought an apex predator to the exhibition, they had brought a demonstration of why their species was uniquely qualified to handle any crisis the galaxy might face. Emma, now contentedly playing with a new toy, looked up at the crowd of alien faces surrounding her and smiled sweetly. She waved her small hand in the universal gesture of greeting, completely unaware that she had just redefined galactic understanding of what constituted true power. Commander Zelix called for a formal vote. The Galactic Council unanimously awarded Earth the exhibition victory, while quietly implementing new regulations requiring advance warning before any human offspring were brought to official gatherings. Several species immediately began developing defensive technologies, specifically designed to withstand what would become known as tantrum-class psychological warfare. Dr. Chen packed up her equipment with the efficiency of someone who had learned to work around small chaos generators. Emma helped by trying to eat important scientific instruments and then offering them back covered in toddler drool. As they prepared to leave, Emma looked back at the crowd of galactic representatives and delivered what would become the most quoted phrase in diplomatic history. She pointed at the assembled beings and announced with perfect clarity, "Bye-bye, silly aliens." The translation systems worked perfectly this time, broadcasting her farewell across the galaxy. It was delivered with such innocent cheerfulness that several hardened military commanders found themselves smiling, despite everything they had just experienced. Dr. Chen carried Emma toward the exit, the child already falling asleep in her arms with the sudden exhaustion that follows a successful tantrum. As they walked away, the galactic representatives stood in stunned silence, finally understanding why humans approached every problem with such confidence. If you could survive raising one of those, you could survive anything the universe had to offer.